Welcome to the Kitchen Table series of the Building Strong Homes podcast, where faith meets family in the most practical and powerful ways. I'm your host, Carol Roper, wife, mom, and former home designer. I used to spend my days drafting floor plans and designing details, but now I help wives and moms design lives rooted in God's Word. These short episodes are like a cozy chat over coffee at my kitchen table. You may not be sitting here physically, but I hope you feel like you're right across from me, listening in as we talk about what it means to build a home that stands strong, not just structurally, but spiritually. This podcast is for women who are done with survival mode. You're craving clarity, you're longing for purpose, and you're ready to build something that lasts. So pull up a chair, friend. Let's talk about faith, family, and the kind of legacy that echoes through generations. Have you felt God calling you to step outside of what you know how to do into an unknown arena? Over 12 years ago, I felt led to begin writing. Me, the girl whose college English teacher said that if I didn't start writing shorter essays, she would fail me. I had no idea why God wanted me to write, and sometimes the question still begs an answer. But I was obedient, and God opened doors I never knew were there. At the time, I'd been drawing house plans for over 25 years. I enjoyed it and knew exactly what needed to be done when I sat down to do my work. First, design a house that the client wants within their desired square footage. Next, dimension and note the floor plan and add all of the door and window sizes. Then draw all four sides of the exterior elevations of the house. And finally, send it to the client for approval. I don't know how many times I've gone through this process, but it's enough that it comes as second nature. Unfortunately, that's not how writing or podcasting works for me. I've never been gifted with the ability to pour forth perfect prose without stressing over it for hours or even days. So why do I do it? After a friend mentioned twice in one conversation that I should write a book, I confessed to her that I had felt God calling me to write, but had no idea where to start. She reminded me about a speaker who'd come to our church several years earlier, Vonda Skelton, and suggested I contact her through Facebook. I did and had a response from Vonda that same afternoon, inviting me to check out her writer's critique group in the next town. Boy, God did not waste any time opening that door. I began attending each month and tried my hand at writing. The critique they gave me was much kinder than I'm sure I deserved, but they were also faithful to show me little ways I could improve my craft. Their encouragement gave me the courage to continue, but it still didn't come easy for me. After attending the group for a while, I'd become frustrated because I felt the learning curve was too steep. I just want to draw houses. I know how to do that, I complained one day to Vonda. This is too hard. I'll never get it. But Vonda wisely reminded me that I once didn't know how to draw house plans either. With practice and persistence, however, it became easier for me. She was right, of course. Nobody is born with skill. It takes practice, and usually lots of it, to become good at anything. That next spring, I attended a large writers' conference, having no idea why I'd spent so much money to attend an event I knew nothing about. I felt like a lost child and almost went home within an hour of arriving. It was the first conference I'd gone to by myself, and I was questioning my sanity. Was this really God's will for me? But just as they'd done in my small writers group, the people at this conference introduced me to a whole new world I never knew existed. One where professional writers, editors, publishers, and teachers willingly helped me learn the ropes of the industry. There wasn't a sense of competition or hiding professional secrets, as I'd expected. Instead, I found people with a passion to help launch, teach, and lead writers. I'd never experienced anything like it and gained enough courage to start a blog, enter contests, and submit articles. My second year at that conference, God confirmed I was headed the right direction when one of my devotions won third place in their contest. The next year, my devotion won first place, and my blog won second. I couldn't believe a professional thought my work was good enough for any award. Shortly after returning home from that conference, I received a call from an editor of Guidepost magazine wanting to publish and pay me for an article I'd submitted. I was overwhelmed, hardly able to believe a portion of my story was going to become part of a magazine that I'd loved since I was a teen. God kept stretching me, and confirmations kept coming. Shortly after that, I received an email from another editor from Guidepost asking if I'd like to submit an idea for a blog post to be featured on their online site. I did, and it was published as well. God took my small step of obedience, an even smaller seed of faith, and brought confirmation from places I never expected. He surrounded me with new writer friends who struggled with the same questions and lack of confidence I do. They lifted me up, and I was privileged to do the same for them. Shortly after my articles were published, though, I began to have doubts again. Why am I doing this? What difference does it make? Does God really want me to continue writing? While in this season of doubt, I met with a couple of writer friends, Ellen and Beth, and shared my frustration. I don't know why God compels me to keep writing, I whined. Why did he allow my story to be published in Guidepost magazine if he still won't give me a true focus for my ministry? Besides, my story doesn't even have any spiritual application. It's just a silly story about how I met my husband, John. What's the point? Ellen and Beth tried to encourage me. It doesn't have to be an outright spiritual lesson for it to benefit someone, Ellen said. Beth nodded her head in agreement, but I still wasn't convinced. Later that afternoon, I met with two other ladies from our writers group to finalize plans for our workshop that Saturday. During the meeting, our chaplain, Marcia, asked if I'd give the devotion for the workshop. I agreed, but wasn't at all sure if I'd have anything inspiring to share, since I was still knee-deep in my feelings of doubt. The following morning, I panicked, not knowing what I was going to say that coming Saturday. As I drove to an appointment, I prayed God would give me something to encourage the workshop attendees. After all, I was on empty. How could I encourage other writers when I was so discouraged myself? A few thoughts came to mind that pertained to my Guidepost article. Even though they weren't earth-shattering, I thought it would probably be enough to get me through. Later that afternoon, when I returned home, I was flipping through the mail and noticed an unusual envelope addressed with beautiful handwriting. I turned it over and saw a stamp that read in bold red letters, "The Department of Corrections has not censored this item. Therefore, the department does not assume responsibility for its contents." I hesitated, thinking there might be a possibility of anthrax in the envelope, since that was at the time when the poison was an actual threat in our mail system. But throwing caution to the wind, I decided to open it anyway. As I looked again at the sender's name, it had a ring of familiarity to it. Carefully tearing open the envelope, I pulled out a 3-page, neatly written letter from a prison inmate. He introduced himself as a member of my former church, having joined after he was incarcerated. I'd never met him, but do remember our pastor mentioning him several times over the years. As I read on, he explained the motivation behind sending this letter. Here is an excerpt. My reason for writing is to thank you for the wonderful story you wrote about how you and John met and began dating. My favorite sentence from your amazing story is just 3 words. John was undaunted. It's hard to believe that such a short sentence can be so powerful. He had asked you out on a date twice and been denied. He could have easily given up and moved on with his life. I'm sure there were plenty of other girls he could have asked out. He didn't give up on trying to date you. I'm glad he didn't. This isn't just a love story. It's a story about faith, patience, and perseverance. I was deeply touched by your story, and I just wanted to thank you for sharing it. The letter went on to say that he'd been incarcerated for 22 years and was coming up for parole in January or February of 2015. The only thing he requested from me is that I pray for him. I realized the reason those three words resonated in his spirit was because he wanted to have the same attitude as he approached his parole hearing. I believe this story inspired him to be undaunted by his slim chance of parole, to have faith. Wow. Tears pooled as I continued reading. This wasn't just a letter from an inmate. It was a letter from God, assuring me I was on the right path. My silly little story about how I met my husband had a deep spiritual depth to it I'd never imagined. I excitedly shared this story with the group of writers attending the workshop the following Saturday. The encouragement they received from the devotion was palpable. God is so good to give us what we need when we're working on His behalf. 1 Corinthians 15:58 in the Message says, "My dear, dear friends, stand your ground and don't hold back. Throw yourselves into the work of the Master, confident that nothing you do for Him is a waste of time or effort." Just because you don't feel qualified or particularly impassioned to do something you believe God is calling you to do doesn't mean you should ignore it. In fact, maybe you should give it further inspection. Remember the old saying, God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. There may be someone out there who needs you right now. If you don't step up to the plate, your purpose won't be fulfilled. If you feel God is leading you into an unknown territory, ask Him to bring you a mentor. As much as we hate to ask others for help, God knows we need someone to walk that unfamiliar path with us. There's probably someone closer than you think who can open doors into a whole new world He'd like to introduce you to, just like Vonda did for me. Step out in faith. Remember, comfort never leads to excellence. And you'll probably gain lots of new friends along the way. I know I have. And for those of you who may want to hear my guidepost story, I'm going to read it to you. Who knows, maybe my silly little story might encourage you as well. Here goes. A marriage that started with spaghetti. Some couples had their song, others their spot, the place where they had their first kiss, or where he proposed. John and I have spaghetti, baked spaghetti. It goes back to New Year's Eve 1979. My family had moved from Greenville, South Carolina to the tiny farm town of Fountain Inn 6 weeks earlier. I was miserable. We moved often, first because of Daddy's military service, then because my parents were looking for a place to settle down. A shy 14-year-old, I just wanted to call a place home. Home. And make friends. I wouldn't have to leave in a few months. When our new next-door neighbors invited my brother and me to their church youth group's New Year's Eve progressive dinner, it took all my courage to go. The first course was at a house down the road. The rec room was quite the scene. Kids were shooting pool, hanging out, talking. I found a stool in the corner and perched there awkwardly, wishing I was brave enough to speak to someone. When it was time to eat, everyone trooped into the kitchen to get salad. Yuck. I stayed put. That's when he walked up. An older boy in a crisp plaid shirt with steel blue eyes, wavy brown hair, and a smile that made my heart quicken. "Hey, I'm John," he said. "What's your name?" "Carol." I was too flustered to say anything more than that. "Nice to meet you," John said. "You're new in town, right? Where are you from?" "Greenville," I replied. I found out he was 16 and had grown up here on a farm that had been given to his family in the late 1600s. Wow, here I was, 6 weeks in town, and this guy's family had been here for 300 years. "Time to move on," the youth minister called. "Everyone get back on the bus." I snagged a seat right by John, and we kept talking until the bus pulled up at the next stop, a farmhouse. John held the door open for me. What a gentleman, I thought. We stood in line in the kitchen with our plates, waiting for our host to dish out the main course. "Where's your house?" I asked, not wanting our conversation to dry up. He gave me a quizzical look and said, "Right here." I was mortified. Of course this was the farm he'd been telling me about. Our host was his mom. Duh. Mom made her famous baked spaghetti, he said. Baked spaghetti? What's that? Well, do you try it, John said, excited. Mom serves it at all our youth events. You'll really love it. He was right. Every bite was the perfect combination of melted cheese, tender pasta, and seasoned beef. This is the best spaghetti I've ever had, I said, getting up to get seconds. John grinned. What did I tell you? The party moved on to the next house, where John and I shared dessert and counted down to the new year together. It was almost as though we were on a date, just the two of us, but all too soon the night was over. A few days later, he called. Hi, Carol. I was wondering if you'd like to go out sometime. My heart leaped, then sank. I can't, I said. I'm not allowed to date until I'm 16. Oh, John said. Well, I'll talk to you later then. We hung up. I guess baked spaghetti on New Year's Eve is the only date I will ever have with him, I thought. The next day at school, he called up to me in the hall and asked me out again. I told him my father had laid down the law. John was undaunted. He asked me out a third time. Since John was brave enough to keep trying, I worked up the nerve to go to Daddy. I told him about John, how we'd met, and what a gentleman he was. He's the nicest guy, Daddy, I said, then begged, Can I please go out with him? Daddy asked our next-door neighbors about John. They spoke so highly of him that Daddy relented. Okay, you can go on a date with this boy, he said, with one stipulation. He has to come to the house on Saturday and meet me first. Oh, no. Daddy was a 6'2" Yankee truck driver who'd served in Vietnam. Even I was intimidated by him. Surely John would turn tail and run at the mere prospect of confronting my father. But when I told him the requirement of our date, John gave me a confident smile. I'll be there. Finally, Saturday came. Daddy decided to cut down some trees around our house. Poor John. Not only did he have to face my father, he had to do it while Daddy was wielding a chainsaw. All I could do was spy on them from the house and pray that John survived the interrogation. He got right in there, helping Daddy finish pulling down a tree. With the chainsaw switched off, I heard Daddy demand, What are your plans with my daughter? I was thinking I could pick Carol up for church tomorrow morning and take her to lunch afterwards, John said. Daddy fired up the chainsaw again. I couldn't hear the rest of their conversation. I saw them shake hands, and John turned to leave. I ran outside to tell him goodbye. Not forever, I hoped. You have my permission, Daddy said gruffly. Daddy says that was one of the best decisions he ever made. John and I think so too. We built our home on his family's farm, right next door to the house where we first shared baked spaghetti on that memorable New Year's Eve. It's home, where we've raised our two kids together, and where we recently celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary. So that's the story. And if you'd like the baked spaghetti recipe, I'll have a link in the show notes where you can get it. If you're discouraged in whatever God has called you to do, don't give up. Stand firm and ask Him to give you the reassurance you need to step out in faith and do His work. He is faithful to answer your prayer. After all, nothing you do for Him is a waste of time or effort. Thanks for joining me at the kitchen table today. If you've ever felt unsure about the path God's nudging you toward, I hope this story reminded you that obedience doesn't require clarity, just courage. Whether you're stepping into something new or still wrestling with the why, know this, your faithfulness matters. Even the smallest yes can ripple into someone else's act of faith. If this episode encouraged you, pass it along to a friend who might need a reminder that God uses ordinary stories in extraordinary ways. Until next time, keep showing up, keep trusting, and keep building what lasts. Don't give up, especially when it comes to following God in obedience. Don't give in, and keep building strong. Remember, you're part of something that matters. Thanks so much for listening.